So it's Valentine's Day and we are here for a very special place branding question time event. We are asking the question, has the world fallen out of love with the Swedish brand? My name's Maddy Savage. I'm an independent freelance journalist and moderator. I've lived in Sweden for almost a decade and I have a long background working for the BBC, also Swedish and global media brands. And over the past few years, I have reported on a lot of the issues that have been affecting the global image of Sweden. Most recently, gang violence, drug crime, questions about whether Sweden will live up to its sustainability targets, questions around Russian aggression and NATO. So it's going to be really interesting to look into some of these issues from a slightly different perspective. You have all been the ones sending in the questions, those of you here in the audience, and many online. We had so many questions and we have sifted through all of them and we've put together a cluster of questions that really represent some of the most popular and common and worrying topics that you guys wanted to discuss. So for full transparency, we've meshed some of them together and shortened them, but they are very much questions from you, the public, and we'll be keeping the questions anonymous. The other thing to say is that this isn't a political discussion. We know a lot of these issues are political. There are policies related to this. We don't have the politicians here with us to answer those questions. Nor are we trying to brush these issues under the carpet to say that everything in Sweden is great. We want to dig into this and look at the wider perspective, how all of this is affecting jobs, the economy, tourism, and most importantly, Sweden, the brand. But again, that's not to take away from the impact that some of these issues have been having on individuals and communities, particularly with regard to violence. I've been out and about reporting in some of the communities where people have lost loved ones, and I don't want to diminish their experiences in all of this. But let's speak to the panel who are going to be taking your questions here today. Let's give them a round of applause while I take a seat. All right, fantastic. So we'll start here with Lynn, who's joining us from the Stockholm School of Economics. She's an associate professor at the Department of Marketing and Strategy. She's also a sustainability expert, director of the Centre for Sustainability Research here in Stockholm, and her research also focuses on human rights. So most of the questions from the audience, as I said, Lynn, but it is Valentine's Day, so we've got a few questions about love, and I'd like to start with, what do you love most about Sweden, before we talk about all the challenges?
There's so many. Thank you for having me. There's so many things that I love about Sweden. I've lived here for almost 30 years now. And beyond all the semlor or the cream cakes that we had yesterday, at least some of us, I assume, I think what I love the most about Sweden is the feeling of trust. The feeling that Swedes have trust in each other, they have trust in our institutions, they have trust no less in themselves. And for me, though it may sound very naive, I think it is one of the special things about Swedish people in Sweden that actually makes many, many things possible.
Thank you very much. We'll hear more from you during the panel discussion. Next up, we have Jani Heinonen, who works for Business Sweden in Stockholm, heading up the global investment promotion operations. And most of you will know Business Sweden is jointly owned by the Swedish state and the Swedish business sector and works on a mission really to help international companies to find their way into the Swedish market. And Jani was previously based in Shanghai, looking after the Asia-Pacific region. So welcome, Jani. My question for you. First impressions matter a lot, both in love and in business. So what do you think is crucial for making a good first impression in a business setting?
I think still it's to meet people with a smile, but also with a lot of respect and really try to listen to what they have to come with to you, so that really understand what their situation is, what their possible challenges are, and then start a conversation based on that. So I think there's a lot of good listening and with a smile.
Like it a lot. Thank you very much. Okay, third up, we have Sophia Bard from the Swedish Institute, and she's head of the unit for image analysis there. The Swedish Institute is a public agency with the goal of promoting interest and trust in Sweden around the world, and you specifically look at information flows, misinformation in the media and social media. And Sophia also has a background in political science. So welcome to the panel. Sophia, tell us your job sounds quite difficult, but what do you most love about it?
I mean, it's a fantastic mission. We try to create trust in the image, promote the image of Sweden abroad. So that's a fantastic mission. But also, as you said, we follow the information flows, and we can retrieve up to 10 million data points on Sweden every month. So we're really sort of in the sort of information flow, and we always have new things to analyse. So
and really valuable to have you here with some of the data and the analysis to help put these difficult themes into context today. Next up, Patrick Andersson, CEO of Business Region Gothenburg, responsible for business development in the city of Gothenburg, also the surrounding municipalities, with a background in finance, most recently working for Swedbank, one of the biggest banks here in the Nordics, and also a very busy board member. I'd be here all day if I listed all of your accomplishments there. But you're from Gothenburg, or based there. What do you think Stockholmers secretly admire about Gothenburg?
We never ever compete with Stockholm, as you know, as the second city of Sweden. But I think today, and looking back for 2 days, that the Stockholmers are thinking about Gothenburg and the tragedy with Liseberg and Oceana, and all of your thoughts and love comes to us, and we feel that. But then coming to hard facts, what the Stockholmers really think, or the dreams about Gothenburg. And I would say that we are very fast adapters and fast followers, and sometimes even lead global change. And then we are really good at collaborating with both Stockholm, but also in the local and in the global community.
It's a shorter commute to go and visit some of the other Nordic cities from where you are as well. Thank you very much to you, Patrick. And we also have Nils from Visit Sweden, Chief Marketing Officer at Visit Sweden, a government-owned company that works to make Sweden an attractive destination for tourists and other visitors. Currently, you've got a very big focus on innovation and sustainability. And Nils's background also includes change management, digitalization, and working across a range of sectors here in the Nordics, including media, finance and energy. So great to have you here with us, Nils. And my question for you is, which Swedish innovation do you love the most?
Thanks, Maddy. Well, I think there are quite many to choose from. I like some of the words that we have, like fika, smörgåsbord, ombudsman, for example. But on a more global level, innovations that have sort of affected the world, I think in many cases, I think there are two things. One is the dry milk, and the other one is ball bearing, which I think is fantastic innovations from Sweden that has.
I do like that you mentioned fika, though. I've got a whole programme coming out on cinnamon buns later this year, because there's a lot of global interest. And finally, Julian from Up There Everywhere, the agency that's hosting us all today. Julian is the founder and chairperson of Up There Everywhere. He's the man behind the branding of Stockholm as the capital of Scandinavia. He's also worked with branding assignments for the Dutch government, the cities of Hamburg, Liverpool, Basel, in other parts of Europe, and also in branding for many different global brands. And Julian's a long-time Stockholmer like myself, who also moved here from the UK, so he also brings that perspective with him. Julian, we don't have a fun question for you, I'm afraid, because we do now need to get into the nitty-gritty of today. And first of all, I'd like to know why you thought it was so important for us to be here discussing these challenges around the image of Sweden.
I was expecting a nice, warm, soft, cuddly question. Well, firstly, like you said, I've been here 25 years. So, I'm a proud Stockholmer. I'm a Brexit Brit. And so I got my Swedish passport when Brexit happened. I'm very proud of it. I've got a lot to thank this country for. Both my boys were born here. We have a business here. We still promote, as you saw in the film, Stockholm and Sweden, because we believe it's a real asset. And so today was really all about, we've all seen the press. We've all experience things possibly. We wanted to know, okay, well, where are we really from a brand perspective? We can't affect the politics. That's too complex for us. But we can comment and affect the branding part. So we thought, well, why don't we just start to talk about it? A bit like Alcoholics Anonymous. First thing I think you do is say, okay, there's a problem. Let's just talk about it, get the facts straight. So it was really that, to find out what are the facts and what do we need to do from a brand perspective. So that was it, Maddy.
Yeah, and I know there's been huge interest from people, sign-ups online, and a busy room here today in Stockholm as well. So let's kick things off then and take a look at the first topic. We had a lot of questions about global rankings. How is Sweden actually doing today? So the first question, are the problems that Sweden has been experiencing having an impact on the country in terms of both our international ranking as a place for inward investment or our image as a good place to live and work? And I think we'll start with Sophia from the Swedish Institute on this one.
Yes, I mean, following the image of Sweden, we of course follow all those indices that are out there. And the most cited, I think, is the Nation Brands Index by Ipsos, and it's Simon Anholt who started it all. And we've followed it for about 15 years, and what we can see is that the image of Sweden is very stable. We've been on the top 10 position in maybe 15 years, around 8, 9, 10. So the overall, sort of, if you go ask sort of an international community, the image of Sweden is very stable, and it's still the same things that people are talking about when it comes to Sweden. So looking at that, sort of the overall top level, the image has not changed.
Even in the last couple of years when we've seen this spike in negative
maybe
coverage.
later we can go into sort of, you have to go bilateral. So if we talk about gang crime or NATO or whatever happenings that we've seen maybe the last few years, we have seen some changes in the image, but in different contexts. So maybe we can go into that. But on the overall level, when you see the Nation Brands Index or the Soft Power Index, it's pretty much the same on the top level.
Okay. Niels, what about from a visitor's perspective?
Yeah, I think it's the same there. If we just go to our brand tracking that we have done as Visit Sweden since, I think, 2013, it's very stable. It hasn't changed anything. Basically, it's been a very strong image of Sweden as a tourist destination. If we go into Nation Brand Index, we are, I think, we increased in the willingness to visit Sweden. So it's strong, and it's one part in nation branding is that's really strong about Sweden as well. And then when it comes to Sweden as a global, as a sustainable destination, I think it's in Euromonitor. I think we've been on top 3 for the last 5-6 years at least. I know Gothenburg has been top destination as a city for many, many years as the most sustainable destination to visit. So yeah, we haven't seen any change there as it is, and we also see the increase in Googling of Sweden as a tourist destination has increased since 2019, I think, from with 30-40% up till today. So, yeah.
Lynn, let's bring in you for the sort of academic perspective on this. Data is always a tricky topic. When do you think we'll be able to measure the long-term effects of some of the challenges now?
I'm not sure. So, in many ways, okay, yes, I'm the boring academic on the one hand side, and on the other hand side, a place brand or image is incredibly complex, and I think depending on what index you look at, what issue you look at. The composite, the holistic picture of Sweden is very positive. It's a great place to invest. You have tech-savvy people. You have work-life balance. You have gender equality. You have many of these things that counteract against some of the negative press on gang violence or discrimination or the current policies of the government. So I'm not sure that we can, say that just this one part will have an enormous impact on the whole place image. So I think it's very difficult to answer that question. I think that one of the biggest things that's happened is that Sweden has been marketed, and I'm not sure I totally agree with you, Julian, in saying that we can't impact politics, because marketing, advertising and so on has a very big impact on politics, I think. But anyway, I think we need to look over a long period of time. Sweden has had a very, very, not always totally true, I think, brand image internationally.
It's had almost a perfect image.
You know, the Pippi Långström, Astrid Lindgren, Bullerby, you know, beautiful, everything is great. And suddenly reality is setting in. And I think that's what has driven a lot of the negative media that is more surprised. We thought this was this perfect, idyllic place that has issues just like any other country has.
Yeah.
We do have a situation that Sweden is one of the most multicultural countries in Europe right now. 20% of the inhabitants of Sweden are foreign born. So, you know, we've had a very big change in a very short period of time.
And we know that's affected a huge amount of things across the board in terms of political policies. You mentioned discrimination, but also talent attraction, and we'll dig into some of those things a little bit later. But let's get the rest of the panelists' perspectives on the rankings and how you see Sweden right now. Let's go to you, Yanni.
Well, I mean, of course, we follow those and refer to those a lot. Also, when we work with international investors that are interested or planning to invest in Sweden. So it's one part of kind of bringing up those data points, because they are, of course, important in many ways. We normally work with around 50 to 60 investments that we land every year in Sweden. So we have a fairly good feeling of what our clients think, not only European clients, but a lot Asian and American clients also. And even last year we conducted a survey with previous clients that have invested in Sweden, because we had a feeling that we wanted, after COVID and everything, wanted to kind of check the situation and take the pulse on that. And we decided to include some questions about security and safety in Sweden and stability. And almost to our surprise, those facts came very high. So a clear majority of our clients that have invested in Sweden appreciated things like stability and security in Sweden. So in a way, it's important somehow to kind of balance all these things against each other. And sometimes maybe we get carried away from the perspective of looking from kind of the inside out, and then not maybe thinking about like, how does it look from the outside in, you know, and maybe it's quite different when you look at the situation in Sweden from the outside. And if you go around, you kind of start to see that a lot of similar challenges are in different societies. So I think it's maybe a little bit more what Lynn was saying. Maybe there was some kind of exceptional, fantastic, you know, environment that was there, but maybe it somehow met the realities of the world in a way, and maybe it's more on par with that. But I wouldn't say that maybe it's something that there would be some kind of catastrophical situation at hand right now.
And last but not least, Patrick.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say both yes and no. We're negotiating with companies coming from all over the world, and we've been celebrating in Gothenburg for at least 10 years. You know, on average, GDP is 4.5%. That means it's almost China growth. And where does it come from? It's coming from research and development expenditures from the private companies. It's digitalization, and now I would say since at least 2 or 3 years it's come all through green transition. And I've been cutting ribbons for at least 2 years, you know, battery factory, 2 R&D centers, Polestar's headquarters competing with England. The battery factory was a competition between 48 city regions from Northern Europe. So of course we can celebrate. That is in the one hand. So Sweden and Gothenburg is still very, very competitive, but we also have challenges. And on the table in one of these negotiations, I shouldn't say which one, it was about violence, crime, segregation. What is the situation in your country? So when some of you mentioned Astrid Lindgren and Barn i Bullerbyn, and so we're not there, so we need to be very, very careful with that one, and in the long term try to fix that. Otherwise we will have another history 10 years from now.
Yeah, and in case any of our our viewers online or here are unfamiliar with some of that, we're talking about the sort of perfect Swedish house in the countryside and the calm way of life, and Astrid Lindgren's books about this. Yes.
I totally agree with you, and I don't want to devalue the challenges that we have, because we certainly do. But sometimes I think they're a bit exaggerated if you put it as a composite of the Swedish brand. I know at our school, at Stockholm School of Economics, what is stopping students actually coming is that they don't have anywhere to live. It's too expensive. Basically, that's the major reason.
Yeah, huge housing crisis and squeeze. But let's move on to media portrayals, because this has already popped up in some of your answers there. We had a lot of questions about the media. And as someone working in the media, it's, you can't broad brush all media as the same. And Sweden's it's certainly taken a bashing from both the left and the right-leaning media, not to mention social media. But this one audience question kind of ties things in together. Do you think the media picture of Sweden is correct? Are we comfortable with the picture that the media is presenting of what's going on, both inside and outside of Sweden? And let's start with Julian on this one.
Okay, I'm a bit odd. I don't consume much, if any, Swedish media. My Swedish is awful, I told you all beforehand. Apart from that, I quite enjoy the BBC radio and TV, and I read the Times, The Economist, and I've got this theory that if something important happens, it's going to be in there. And I would say over the first 20 years in Sweden rarely got into it. In the last 5 years, it's gone through the roof. So yeah, there is coverage out there of what's happening in Sweden, where I would agree. I think Lynn said it about it's not the events, it's the fact that it's Sweden. Cradle to grave and all of that, and safe. I think it's that shock value of Sweden. And then media, obviously, there's a bit of a feeding frenzy. We want a story like that as well in this publication. So from my perspective, I think that's where we are with it.
And that's certainly what I experience as a journalist when I get editors ringing me from the UK or the US. This has happened in Sweden. That is definitely a very common reaction. Sophia, you monitor media portrayals across the board, traditional media and social media. What are you seeing? How much do you feel that pictures have been twisted, exaggerated, or not lifted enough?
I think most of the media coverage, social media and media is, of course, relevant. I mean, it's a discussion, it's a democracy where we can have a discussion on what's happening in Sweden, and that's totally legitimate. But of course, looking into different sources, you have all sorts of biases. You have selection biases in some ends where you sort of focus on one issue. So if you would only follow that source, you would have sort of very limited picture or image of Sweden portrayed. And of course, Sweden is used as an example in very many cases. Many of these issues that we've been discussing, Sweden is sort of the example of either how to sort of construct a society or a policy. And Sweden is getting a lot of attention in media and social media when we are used as an example of something.
Be that positive or negative. So it could be parental leave, it does well. COVID, questionable, those sorts of single issues.
Yeah, and also now we know that we have a problem with disinformation about Sweden. There are actors around the world that are deliberately trying to sort of portray Sweden in, for example, we know everyone has heard about the disinformation campaign against Sweden, Swedish social services, portraying Sweden as a country where authorities kidnap Muslim children. And I mean, that is also part of the media image. And talking about sort of the key drivers for attracting talent and investment, I mean, we know that one key driver, as you were saying, is quality of life in Sweden and equality. And these things, like portraying Sweden as a country where people are not treated equal, that is something that potentially could harm the image of Sweden and affect our potential to attract talent and investment.
Lynn, anything to add on that? I mean,
no, I think you're right on the money. we work a lot with knowing, understanding, and feeling, and the knowing, and which is the facts, what is actually going on, understanding what it means. While the media, I think, and politicians, for that sake, are working very much on the effect, on the feeling, and jumping to conclusions that are very often not based in facts. So here I would argue that, so you have all these economic factors, you have welfare, gender factors, all of that building an image, but then you have the moderating effect of politicians and media jumping in, not least of all from social media, that may not be very grounded in the actual facts. And I think that's problematic also in a democracy in that way. I don't know how often I hear, well, the research says, or according to evidence and so on. But if you probe a little bit further, what evidence, what research, how was that done? And it's become this mantra that we live in a country that is very rationalistic. We live in the Nobel country. And of course, everything should be based on facts and knowledge and evidence. But today they've been totally decoupled, it seems, in very much of the external media.
Let's move on to branding. We could talk about the media probably for the next hour, but we've got a few key topics that also came in from our audience, and it's your questions that we're focusing on today. A few about branding. What is the Swedish brand all about today? And how is that changing? We've already picked up on some of that, but let's start with you, Sophia. What is the picture of what is the Swedish brand?
I mean, first of all, what is a nation brand? I mean, for us, when we talk about a nation brand, it's about perception, and that is what we are experts at. What's the image of Sweden abroad? But it's also about promotion. What do we want to talk about, and what do we emphasize when we're out talking about Sweden? And it's also about performance. How do Sweden and Swedish organizations perform? So in the ideal world, those three are sort of harmonizing. So. And for Sweden, in a way, I think we've have a situation where there is harmony in this. I mean, we have, as we were already touched upon, I mean, Swedish society and governance is sort of in the core of the perception of Sweden, and that is also what we, of course, want to talk about because it's important for business, for example. But also Sweden has a sort of very international approach where we're considered as a country that contributes internationally to climate change, to reduce poverty and to peace and security around the world. And also when it comes to these issues that we talk about today, of course, security is very important, security in the Swedish society. And looking at those indices again, we perform still very, very well in that. So right now we have a situation where all those, the perception, the performance, and also the promotion is sort of in harmony. But that is not something that you should take for given. I mean, that could change. So even if one of those aspects changes, the brand is going to change.
I think what we see in our line of work, especially if we think both for promoting Swedish companies to grow global sales and go international, but also from our investment promotion part is what Patrick already mentioned here, is about the green transition and the whole notion of sustainability and Sweden being in the forefront of sustainability globally also. We have a lot of clients that have come to us in the last 5 years, really, because they want to be part of the sustainability journey that Sweden has been already for quite a while, and you can see that our largest projects that we have been involved with are a lot around green transition, especially around battery industry, electrification, and these kind of transitional parts of the automotive industry, for instance. So I think that the brand really has been very strong around sustainability, so strong that we almost have had almost like a too high demand, and that set a lot of pressure on the infrastructure, as we know now, for the need of more renewable energy and the infrastructure of electricity transfer in the country. So in that sense, I would say that sustainability is very strong in business, both for exports and imports.
Nils, from a tourism perspective?
Yeah, we look into this quite a lot, and that's special on the focus markets where we are on, and especially I would say Europe and US, where we look into this, and we basically have this more or less same association or how they perceive Sweden as a tourist destination, and really fine association. It's the nature, the accessible nature. It's openness and freedom. It's sustainability. It's safe and secure, and a lot more. So there's a lot of things that they say that are really good, and what they associate Sweden as a tourist destination. But and then we also see that it differs from market to market depending on how well you know Sweden. And we are maybe not the most well-known country in the world, especially a small country up in the north. So I think that might be one of the things that we should address. How can we get Sweden to get more well-known? Because then you get a better understanding on what we have to offer. But I think we see that we have a really strong and solid sort of image as a tourist destination. That's been for many years. And it's a good image and something that we can build on when promoting Sweden.
Okay. A supplementary question that came through. I'm hearing a lot of positive things, but we've had a lot of questions about companies that currently associate themselves very strongly with the Swedish brand. So companies like IKEA, Volvo, Absolut, which started out in Sweden. What does the current situation do to potentially impact those brands? Let's ask Patrick that one.
Well, I know at least one company very well, Volvo, Gothenburg. And it's two companies really. They invest heavily in Sweden now, and to add something that Janne said is in the innovation power of Sweden. A lot of companies, even though it's a lack of companies globally. Last week we had this ceremony with Volvo Cars, Next Step, and Vectura, a Wallenberg company. They put in only 5 billion Swedish crowns to make an innovation center. And that's serious. The other companies I don't really know, but of course they are very close to Sweden. And I know how the management and the board of directors in Volvo argue. So I would green transition, innovation, Sweden as a front runner in those fields. They also have, challenges that they address, but I would emphasize that.
Do you think it's going to be less positive to market yourself as we're the brand from Sweden in these current times?
I think it depends a little bit, like we already heard from Lynn here, that, so that we heard about this fact that it depends a little bit more bilaterally which markets you look at, so you cannot really talk about all of the world in terms of exports, for instance. So that really is an important part. So we have just made some quite recent surveys and studies where the companies say that a clear majority of the exporting companies say that the brand of Sweden is important for them, that they are using it. At the same time, over 53% of these companies say that they are concerned about how that image has been challenging them and how they should position themselves. So it's more complicated than what it used to be, and I think that's really true, that you really have to look at which market you're targeting and how you position that Sweden brand in terms of your own company brand.
Yeah, I can see Patrick and Julian both nodding there. What would you like to add to that?
Yeah, and just to be clear on one thing, those global companies that we are now talking about, it's also calculation. Where do I get the most rate on the investment? And as a global company, should I be in South Carolina? Should I be in Shanghai, Guangzhou? Or should I be in Munich in Germany or should I be in Sweden? That is also very clear on the table. So we can't take anything for granted.
I think part of the question was how do they leverage the Swedish brand, not just where do they invest. I'm still a real advocate of saying Sweden, Stockholm for me as well, and Gothenburg, great brands. And for what we're hearing on the statistics, we're a long way from the moment of saying, actually, it's negative. It's not. I still think they're fantastic assets to use. IKEA, every IKEA you go to around the world, it's Sweden. You go there to buy your meatballs as well as a Billy bookcase, because it's part and parcel of the Swedish brand. And I think it's worth saying, and credit to you guys, because I think marketing a place is way more difficult than a traditional brand. You think of, Coke, IKEA, any consumer brand, they own it. and they can do what they want. A place brand, who owns the place? Apart from Kim Jong-un, North Korea, most places are not owned. So what that means is it's a really tough job to get all the stakeholders, all the government agencies moving in the same direction to do the right thing. And that does make it way more complex. So I think that's the complexity of it. And for me, the Swedish brand, open, progressive, caring, all of those things, I think the thing that's under threat, which we've got to make sure we don't lose. When I first came to Sweden, the biggest word for me in Sweden was safe. What is the Volvo brand? Why'd you buy a Volvo? Safe. Whether it is the safest car or not, it doesn't matter. Emotionally, people believe it is because 50, 60 years of marketing it. And I believe that's part of the Swedish DNA in that brand. The other bizarre thing living in Sweden today is when we were doing the branding of Stockholm, it was okay, it's a great place and quality and everything else, but it's expensive. Now, if you've been out for dinner in London, New York, you've stayed in a hotel in San Francisco, Sweden is really, really good value. That picture, because of the exchange rate, has changed on its head. So those two things, interestingly, have changed around. So, that's just an observation.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Sweden wants to market itself having a weak krona, but it is a good time for foreigners to come and visit.
Come to Sweden.
Yeah,
and that's actually the tourist that has been here. That's what they say, a good value for money. Even though their first impression in some places might see the Nordics as sort of dark, cold and expensive. When they come here, they see, especially in the summer up north, it's light So, but good value for money is something that sticks with them.
We have had rapid inflation recently, but it was a bit slower than in some other countries in the run-up. Lynn, you've been trying to
I think all the image of Sweden has been for a long time built up over a lot of really good reasons. And so you have a very positive picture when it comes to sustainability, to safety, and so on. But I think it's a bit worrying if we continue just pushing on that without also acknowledging and dealing with some of the issues we have. We have, it has been an innovative leader on many, very progressive, very liberal, and so on. Is it any longer? I'm talking about the authenticity of what we're marketing, and over time, if we're marketing something, other countries have caught up. So are we continuing to market something that we may not be a leader on, that we're actually regressing on certain things? Can we continue pushing that without actually dealing with it? Will our stable, wonderful country image endure then?
And I guess that links into the whole trust issue as well. I mean, recently I was doing an interview around the topic of gender equality, and Sweden's been seen as a huge global leader, but actually I think there's one CEO.
There's a glass ceiling, but overall on the general public, with parental leave and so on, it's been very, very
We're
positive.
seeing at the top level, and also inward investments to female-led founders and diverse founders on the whole is much lower. So there is that question around how much you can market Sweden on things it's done well in the past versus the current
and
picture.
right now on the EU level, Sweden is regressing. We've been a leader and one of the first countries to bring in a whole lot of different things and been pushing the climate and environment issue. Now we're getting quite a lot of pushback from other EU nations where we're going backwards. So, how do we deal with this if we do not see those issues? How stable and enduring will the positive brand place image of Sweden really, stay?
Yeah, and again, dangerously close to politics, because obviously across the spectrum there'll be different priorities on some of those issues. But let's move on to the next key topic for our audience, which was around the economy and money. So if things continue to be challenging, if the media image continues to be negative, what could the potential impact be on the Swedish economy? And could this affect other Scandinavian countries too? That's interesting, given that it's been in the news a lot this week about Swedish gangs infiltrating Norway. Nils, let's take that from you. How worried are you about wider economic jitters?
tough question. But as I said, from a tourist perspective, of course, when it comes to sort of gang violence and crime, it's not positive in any way, especially not for the individuals closest to it, but on a societal level, and also maybe in the long run have an impact on the Swedish brand as well. So of course that's not good in any case. But as we see it from now, both from journalists, we have a lot of contact with journalists and tour operators around on the markets where we operate, and also from tourists, we don't see that anything that affecting that yet. And I think also from a Sweden perspective, I think that sort of tourism has a really good impact. It helps with sort of place development, place attraction, but also helps with talent attraction. A lot of this is sort of built up by the tourism industry to make a place attractive, which I think is important, especially for the green transition in the north, etc. But one thing that might sort of affect the economy more, I think, is the accessibility just to come to Sweden, both for investment, travel here, etc., and also to travel around in the country. And again, I think to invest more in sort of talking about branding and communication about Sweden, because I think we are not as well known as we think ourselves. I think the further you come from Sweden, we are not as well known. So we need to invest more in branding and marketing and tell what Sweden is.
And what do you mean by accessibility? Transport, visas?
Yeah, transport to Sweden, basically.
Well, we've always struggled
Arlanda, for example.
because you take SAS as an example. When it was set up, I mean, we got the head office, and Copenhagen got the hub.
Yeah.
What do you want? You want the hub. You want to be a place you can get to. And that was always one of the dilemmas for Stockholm in terms of being able to have easy access. So that was an impact on Stockholm.
But also to create a sustainable society, to get people to move here. If we take up in the north, for example, I think we need to create an attractive place. And I think a lot of that is built up by companies operating in the tourism industry to make the place attractive, because that attracts talent in the end, which affects the economy.
Yeah.
But then you need to be able to get there and have a good place to stay at.
But again, as always, bordering on the political when we're talking about should we expand airports, should we invest in trains?
That's so scary. I hear that all the time. And why is it so scary to be bordering on the political?
Because we don't have the politicians here to fully share their views. We don't have...
we vote. We live in a democracy, and we vote for our politicians, so we could be pushing them even though they're not here.
Yeah, absolutely. But I just think this is a session that has been designed around the place branding aspect, and I don't want to minimise those issues either by giving them sort of 2 minutes attention when whether we should expand Arlanda Airport is a huge topic of political debate. But yes, do come in, Yanni.
I think that Nils is saying also on this whole discussion about, I think, Sweden and the kind of neighboring countries. I think that this, yes, we have to have respect of the challenges that are there, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of strength in the Nordics of this kind of societal kind of comparability, together. And I think that also can help in solving a lot of these challenges. Maybe they are not only Sweden's challenges, maybe they are challenges that the Nordic countries will need to look at together also and are looking at together. So we already see this integration in Nordics happening now through the security policy issues and all that's happening in that area. But I think that they are going to grow even more into the economic area. So I think that this kind of like a Nordic economic area, kind of like a block, kind of in that sense, is growing. So I think that's something in the future. So it starts from security, but it's going more into economy, and it goes then into also branding the Nordics. So I mean, many people, anyways, when they visit a bit further away, they visit at least 2 or 3 or all the Nordic countries at once. So I think that there is a lot of strength in that, and all the Nordic countries are also then at the same time very similar, but also very unique in their own way. So I think that there is an advantage of this branding that, yes, Sweden, but then also Sweden in the Nordic context.
Do you think Sweden does enough to brand itself as a specific place rather than a part of Scandinavia?
I think that the advantage of Sweden is, because originally I'm from Finland, so I can really say this. The advantage of Sweden is that Sweden is smack in the middle of the Nordics. So the more Sweden owns the Nordic question in different areas, it's always going to be Sweden in the middle. So I think that that's something that Sweden always has as an advantage. So even when we do projects for clients, especially if we think about sales or marketing kind of activities, Nordic headquarter kind of things, it's always very easy to say that it should be somewhere in Sweden, and you have your accessibility to all of Nordics is really good. So I think that there is a natural geographical advantage of Sweden being kind of the center of the Nordics,
or the capital of Scandinavia, as Julian coined it.
Even when we were doing that, we knew full well, okay, the capital of Scandinavia, and I believe Stockholm's the best place to come. We knew it would improve attraction as a magnet for all of Scandinavia and the Nordics. Because investors will come and look, and I like that. Go to Copenhagen and look, or Gothenburg, and they'll make their decision. But to get them to come to Scandinavia, and interestingly, you do market research, 95% of the world thinks Scandinavia includes Finland, Iceland, and on a good day, Switzerland. And I mean, it's not the truth, but it's what people believe, and that's just the way perception is. And so we always knew what was good for Stockholm was good for Scandinavia and Sweden. And I think you're right, we're becoming more of a block. We're 25, 28 million people. That's much more attractive as a trading area. So I think that will be the future direction.
Thanks, Julian. We had a lot of questions about jobs and immigration. So here's a question which I think we'll start off with for Lynn. Is the negative reporting on Sweden going to make recruiting international talent more difficult? Are there any signs it may have already had an impact?
Quick answer, no. I don't think so. It's also very correlated with economy. It's probably correlated with the access to good living conditions. I think the bigger question is, in veering into politics here again, is the migration laws. I think that is most definitely what will be a challenge, not least of all to many, many sectors and companies in Sweden who need and want skilled, talented, competent people to come to Sweden.
Who else would like to pick up on that?
Just underline what you just said by Lynn. It's and my bosses are politicals, so but I'm that old, so I can say based on facts, it's a lot of talent coming into Sweden, 50, 60, 70 countries. But if you're outside Schengen, migration office is a huge problem for the companies. That is a major question. It's getting a little bit better, but you can't wait for 6 months or 8 months. Then the family from India or from the US, they have a global market. So you need to, and then of course is housing, schools, and so on. Then and work for the one who comes with the wife, husband, wife, husband. But migration is a huge, if you're outside of Schengen.
Yeah, and the laws have got a lot tougher, but some of the issues that you mentioned, things like housing and how welcome people feel, those issues have been talked about a lot for as long as I've been here, 9 years or so, and they keep coming up. People are facing the same sorts of challenges when they move and try and settle. Would anyone else like to expand on that?
I think very quickly, it is of course clear that there is changes in what the laws are bringing in to us, and as Patrick is saying there, we have to keep in mind that talent attraction is all the time one of the core issues in investment promotion work also, and when we work with our projects. I'm not that worried about the kind of top of the pyramid. I think that top talent is always kind of recognized, and that's also put on the agenda of the current government. The worry is maybe a little bit also that in this green transition and these big industrial projects, it's not only these very top jobs that are there. There's jobs on all different levels. Of course, that brings in an opportunity for us to bring in parts of the Swedish society that have not been able to integrate that well yet, and bring that kind of jobs that are easier to get into, because operator jobs in different factories, because it's a lot of industrial opportunities, then they are easier to get into. But some of the companies also need to bring their own initial staff for the first 1 to 2 years, because that factory needs to be running and at day one, and then you can bring in more knowledge and train. So talent attraction goes on all levels, and that's sometimes forgotten.
And the latter is a challenge because of tougher salary thresholds and migration rules.
Yeah.
Let's talk a bit more about solutions then. Without coming forward with specific political policies on the economy or migration. That's the bit we can't do because we've only got 30 minutes. But we had a lot of people asking, what can those of us who are working in Sweden do to focus on helping to improve the brand image of the country? And again, I think also keeping in mind the fact that we're not trying to push any of these issues under the carpet and pretend they don't exist. But let's pick up with you, Sophia. Looking at the data, what can people that are here now do?
But what we can see is that if people sort of integrate with people from other countries, the image is going to improve. So, I mean, everything that we do from sort of the government side and also the companies and everyone else that is acting internationally has a difference. So just being out there, as Niels was saying, we see that, the knowledge about Sweden is much less than the image. The image is much stronger than the knowledge about Sweden. So being out there, talking about Sweden, that is something that everyone can do, obviously. And so I think being out there, talking about Sweden, I think that is what we should do.
And you mentioned talking to people from other countries as well. We were talking about one of the other rankings when we were preparing for this, which is about how it can be a difficult place to make friends for people who do move here from other countries. Is there anything more to add on that in terms of how to navigate that aspect of things from any of you?
Invite someone home for dinner?
I mean, people are laughing, but it can take a while for those invitations to come for people moving. What do you think from sort of a branding perspective? How can we be talking about Sweden when those questions inevitably come up? Is it still safe? What's going on there?
Lynn is itching to get into the politics. So let's start with a politician. Winston Churchill, great politician. One of his great sayings, never waste a good crisis. And okay, we've got a bit of a crisis, so we can use it. And I love history, and I think in a historical perspective, this has happened before to other places. New York, 1976, was bankrupt. The oil crisis, you had crime. President Ford refused to bail out New York. So what did that create? Probably the greatest place brand campaign on earth, I Heart New York. And political initiatives to fix the problems. But the fact is, it resulted in a campaign that really stood out, went to the heart of of what New York was all about, which was the people. And that campaign is still running. And so actually finding that centre point that you can build the brand around. And for me, good brands aren't fluffy, they're not wallpaper, they stand for something, and finding that centre point. Stockholm, the capital of Scandinavia, you either love it or hate it, either is fine, but don't ignore it and sort of engage with the facts. That's what we did. And so I do think the answer to this is firstly the data, understand the real situation, get the data out there for journalists and people to understand. How do we do that nowadays? Search, content. So we create the right kind of content which is being consumed, because that's where people are reading all this stuff. It isn't just in the traditional newspapers. So generating content that is picked up, and I think that's what we need to do.
I like that too, because it also goes to the authenticity question here.
It's got to be real. It's got to be, and so often places, the historical fact of the place is quite often the nugget that says, okay, that's what we're going to be authentically. We can claim this. This is what we've got. So you've got to find that.
Niels?
Well, I'm a marketing working with the place branding for Sweden. So I think it's super important to continue that and heavily invest more in it, and not just from a touristic point of view. I think from different sectors, take talent or investment or whatever. I think you need to do it from the different sort of sectors, because you can't talk about everything all the time, because then it becomes unclear to read the message. So I think from our point of view is to talk about Sweden as a tourist destination, and of course be authentic about it and have a twist to it. And we try to do that. We try to sort of change the convention on how you do traditional destination marketing. A lot of the countries out in the world, this is my point of view, look quite similar. We try to do it in another way. We tried now last time to put in some humor in it. I never got so many messages from emails and LinkedIn messages from people around the world saying, we love this, continue with it. We need also more humor in a world like this. So I think that's good. But we need to build more on communication and marketing and branding in different sectors.
But it is interesting because you do see those messages get through. I mean, some of the very same newspapers that are sort of very much on the side of what on earth is going on in Sweden, it's falling apart, are also running lovely tourist features about look at this great boat trip that you can go on. I've kind of been watching that side of things evolving very recently. A quick side comment on tourism I wanted to quickly ask you about, Nils. We haven't got a lot of time to get into this, but we did have one question about the impact of Love is Blind Sweden, the reality TV series that has gone massive globally. And apparently research by travel site Momondo suggested a 150% increase in searches for flights to Sweden after the show started airing compared to before. I mean, I've seen it. I actually don't think it's a very good advert for dating in Sweden, which is a whole other topic. But it had some very nice drone shots. But I'm just wondering, as a tourist board, what's been going on there?
Well, we haven't been involved with it, but it's positive. Everything that sort of promotes Sweden in a good way to attract people to come here and visit, to learn more what we are as a country and as a destination, I think is good. So absolutely.
Well, we were joking, even the film noir and the bridge and all of those more black things.
Yeah, but
you get people who visit the sets and they want to see Ystad or wherever it is. So it does have a positive impact.
Yeah, and that's also a trend within tourism, a sort of global trend which is called set jetting. You want to be what you have seen on the dating show apparently, but also like White Lotus, etc., Frost, etc. So you want to go to destinations that has been in a film or a TV show. So that's a big thing.
Yeah, we did have a question actually about whether some of the Nordic noir TV drama might have impacted some of the negative attitudes towards Sweden. We've talked a lot about crime, we mentioned climate, but some of the other questions came in. What about NATO, religion, even the Swedish response to COVID? And I'm just wondering if we could quickly touch on which other of those factors you feel have played a big influence. And I'll start with you, Sophia.
I think tomorrow we're releasing our annual report on the image of Sweden. And if you see just what things comes up, what are the most viral things? It's not Love is Blind, but it's NATO, of course, and it's the Quran burnings. We have Eurovision, and we also have the World Cup in football last year. But I mean, all of those things that you mentioned, they are affecting Sweden in different ways. I mean, COVID, obviously, it was the only thing that people were talking about in 2020, and Sweden was definitely in focus for that discussion. But what we've seen later on is that it's a question of if you're pro or con lockdown. So your sort of perception of Sweden is related to your perception on how to combat that issue. When it comes to NATO, of course, that was one of the most talked about things last year. When it comes to Sweden, Quran burnings is on the top, which is also quite interesting, but the next one is NATO. And of course, you have two different narratives. You have the Western narrative and you have the other narrative. And the way that your perception of Sweden is going to be affected is, of course, depending on what part of that sort of narrative you listen to. But what we can see is that both narratives sort of affected in the same way, that Sweden is moving towards the West, and Sweden is now a part, sort of, we've always been maybe a part of West, but we are now sort of not an alternative to West for many countries. So both narratives sort of lean into the same change of perception of Sweden.
Lynn, anything to add on that? Any of those issues?
No, I was just thinking through history. images such as Swedish women as being sexually promiscuous. It was something that was very much discussed in the 70s. But you could connect that. I'm thinking about the good things, about being liberal, about being progressive, about having, I mean, Nobel is probably one of the greatest brands that we can have. There's so many good things that need to be interconnected here. If we can find this I Heart New York that encapsulates all of these fantastic things. Right, and they can endure for such a long time if we can find that. But it needs to be connected. The innovation, the tech savvy, actually very low. Even though we go crazy over it, the bureaucracy in Sweden is actually quite low compared to other countries. It's very easy to do business relatively here. There's so many good things. How can we encapsulate this in a I Heart New York kind of thing?
Okay. One final question, and then we might be able to take a few questions from the audience here in the room. So if your question hasn't been asked, you've got a few minutes to think about whether you're brave enough to ask it. But this final question, we did say we keep things anonymous in terms of who sent the questions in, but I'm just going to preface with it did come from a Swede. And the question is Sweden or are Swedes too smug? And I think this is a really interesting one because we hear a lot about jantelagen, the law of Jante, the idea that here in Sweden you shouldn't be seen as seeing yourself as better than anyone else. But on the other hand, there has been this image of Sweden as, well, aren't we the best at climate, gender equality, being open, being safe? And some of those things are starting to be questioned. So do any of you think Sweden has been a bit too smug? I'll start with Julian.
I'm a foreigner. I was a foreigner. What would I say? I would say there's a lot of Swedes in the room. Actually, I would say yes, but I would say I'm a Brit as well, and we're even more smug. So, there's a lot of that in most nations, and I would say, if anything, observation on Sweden is we need to be a little bit more, I've got to think of my Swedish here, we need to be a bit more kaxig. We've got to stand up and be proud of the place and sort of be, prepared to say, no, this is a fantastic place. And sort of be a little bit more pushy in that respect. I think Swedes are very calm and quiet, and in a marketing sense, you do need to be a bit more pushy.
So you don't think they've been that smug? You think they could actually celebrate more?
I think it's been very, we're so great, we don't need to really worry about, doing anything. Well, believe me, in a marketing sense, you need to do stuff. You do need to get out there because there are other nations who I won't name any, who are much more sort of pushy and pushing their message. I think we're a little bit, we sit back a little bit, and I think that's got to change.
Particularly
in a
against
flattened
this
world,
climate.
because we were talking about this earlier about, who do we compete with? We don't just compete sort of Gothenburg, Stockholm, or we compete with Boston and San Francisco. And so you really got to up your game to get out there, to get the message out, because it's a fantastically innovative place, but there's not enough known about us. So I think a little bit more confident and a little bit more pushy would help.
Yanni, what do you think, as a Finn who's worked in a lot of other parts of the world as well?
Well, I think that I'm always laughing a little bit at this fact that Swedes need to be more selling and marketing, and then I always say, well, please come to Finland, and you'll see a bit different, in that sense. So I of course enjoy working in a Swedish environment, being a Swedish-speaking Finn. Obviously, it's a great cultural experience also, but it depends a little bit where in Sweden you are, with who you talk, and all that stuff. I think that if you go across the country, people are very down to earth and in a good way, proud of what they are doing, and there's a lot to be proud of. But of course, yes, it's a hard, tough global competition, and we can be quite sure of it, that the further you go away from Sweden, especially away from Europe, people really don't know that much. So it's really, for us, when we try to convince our clients to come to Sweden, I mean, they hardly know the difference between, Stockholm or Gothenburg or anything, they just hardly place, something, in China they only say North Europe, they don't differentiate on the countries. So I think that it's very important to be very sharp, and I think that as Julian was saying, that to really all the time admit that people don't know enough, so that you have to do more and you have to work hard on that, and even harder now in a very difficult global situation. So I think that more can be done.
And where there are legitimate problems, challenges, which we're not shying away from. Yes, you're trying to jump in there.
Yeah, smug, I think it has two sides. It's part of our DNA, and we should be proud of that. But we can't underestimate the speed and the complexity, and as Janne says, the global competition. So we need to put our feet even further. But we shouldn't lose smug. It's part of our DNA. It's part of our culture, and I think it's very good. But we need to be a little bit more of Zlatan Ibrahimovic. In
Okay, a bit more loud and proud.
Yes.
Lynn?
I'm not sure smug is something I would be proud of, though. But when you think about it, it's a country of 10 million people, 10.5 million people. I actually think Sweden has done amazing in the world, if you think about it that. It's a tiny little country way up in the north. Why would we know about it, in many ways? So I think you can be proud, not smug, but proud of that you actually have gotten out quite a lot of it for a very small country. But I do think, at least from a background from Norway, and I can share with you there, Norwegians, I remember coming to Sweden and people were saying, oh, you guys are so nationalistic. You're out with your 17th of May flag and all of this. You're like Americans with their waving the flag. The Swedes kind of, well, we know we're so good, so we don't have to advertise it. There's that kind of smugness that is also verges on arrogance, I think. So I do think that there is something to work on. We're good. Swedes are good, but they know it very well, too. And maybe some more humbleness wouldn't be too wrong, I think.
Okay. Really, really interesting comments from all of our panellists. Thank you so much for being here. We will just briefly see if there's anyone in the audience here in Stockholm who wanted to add anything. We've got a microphone here. Please don't feel you have to be shy, Swedes. Yes, we have a gentleman over here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a very interesting panel. I just want to add one thing. That was one very good question. What can we do to improve the brand of Sweden? And since I've been working for many, many years with the branding of Stockholm, and also talked a lot about Stockholm, Julian knows that I always end my presentations by talking about our problems. And I think that is very important, because many people who try to advocate their brands, they talk all the time about everything that is fantastic. 2 months ago, I heard a guy who was, I think he must be some colleague to you, for coming from Portugal, and he was talking for 20 minutes about everything that was fantastic in Portugal. I know that Portugal is fantastic, but there was not a sign of problem, and that is not trustworthy. So just remember that. Don't start with the problems, of course not, but you have to end your presentation with talking about your problems and what you're doing about it.
That's interesting, because we did have a discussion backstage about transparency and how it's important to highlight that things aren't perfect here, but are we contributing to the negative branding of Sweden, and how to get that nuance and that debate right as locals and people working in business.
Pick up on that and how you deal with it. Okay, I mean, in the winter, it's pretty dark. Okay, but do we talk enough about the fact that in the summer you can play golf at 3 o'clock in the morning? So I mean, there's an upside to it as well. I mean, but there are negatives. We have to be honest about that. And that's authentic. I think you just have to address them in the right way.
Yes, Yanni.
Thank you very much for bringing up that important point. I think that it's part what our clients also appreciate if we are honest, in all ways, because there's always upsides and downsides. And I think that for us, as I mentioned, we have these huge opportunities of enormous industrial establishments coming Sweden's way, but at the same time we are very also kind of in detail going through with the client, what we can do in terms of finding the right workforce or finding the right energy supply for energy intensive projects. And sometimes we really have to say that, sorry, we don't think that in your time frame we're able to match that. That also happens these days, unfortunately. But I think that still it's better for us to do that than the client would, go forward with us for another 2 years, and then we would, hit the wall, and they would go around saying, they lied to us, they promised us everything, we couldn't fulfill that. So I think that it's a very important message that we have to be honest, and the clients appreciate that. Sometimes they say, okay, we can be flexible. Let's put the time frame a bit further ahead, and let's do this and that.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else in the audience? Yes. Hi.
Hi. Thank you very much. It's amazing panel. I'm from Mexico. Have been living here for almost 1 year. So first, I love the campaign in the airport. Last week I was in Orlando airport and I saw the pictures and say, oh my God. Actually, I was thinking I saw the video from Michael Bublé. I saw the same. Say, I think in Mexico we have to do the same. So first, it's like an amazing campaign. Second, it's interesting for me talking about gangs and crime because I'm from Mexico, so for us it's so normal talking about this, that's true. So, but when I was hearing about you, the perception is I say, oh my God, for us in Latin America, talking about this is so normal, So my point is I see a big opportunity from the brand Sweden, talking because when Gianni and Julian talking about the big companies, for example, Scania, and when you were talking about Gothenburg, Scania, Mexico is going to be one of the top 10 markets in Mexico, So talking about investment, technology, infrastructure, sustainability, I think that in my point of view, I represent some Mexican companies, is when you ask people in Mexico about Sweden, they say, Sweden? What is in Sweden, And I had to explain a full presentation about the big brands, it's like big country with a small population. And always I ask one question for my Mexican clients. Do you know a Mexican brand that it's a global, globally? And they say, yeah, we have a lot of them. Say, tell me one. No one. Corona, yeah. But Corona, it's the first, it's the only one, So at the end, what I want to say is that you have a lot of opportunities in Latin America because I think that most of people talking here in Sweden is talking about crime and gangs, and in Latin America nobody cares about that.
Okay, so your point is, and I think it's a very valid point that things are very challenging here, but in terms of the global picture of Sweden still being a lot safer than other countries. And so you're saying perhaps Sweden could market itself at a time of trouble around violence in places where people might not see it as that much of a big deal? Is that your point? Yeah? Would you guys be looking for more investment opportunities in other markets?
But it's again this connection between facts and knowing and the effect. And I would be much more concerned about getting lost in New York City than I would be in Sweden, because the fact is actually the homicide rate in the US is 5 times higher than in Sweden. Right, but that's all we're talking about, and it's this change that has happened.
Correct.
Although again, I think some of that situation is localized because it does depend where you are in Stockholm, who what your life is, that might contribute.
Same in New York.
That would contribute to those risk factors. Exactly. Yes.
I think very briefly, it's just all about perspective again. That I said in the beginning, this inside out or outside in perspective. So very interesting. Thank you for bringing that up for us on our work that we do with supporting the exports of Swedish companies. Obviously, Mexico is growing quite a lot in importance, and as you understand from the Inflation Reduction Act and the whole reindustrialization of the green transition in the US, Mexico is really well positioned for that. So I think we are going to see quite a lot of more Swedish investments coming into Mexico in the coming years.
We can squeeze in one final question, and then we're going to have to wrap things up. Thank you so much. We're just passing the microphone around for those watching
I
online.
hope it's not too long a question to answer, but engineering versus creativity. In the age of AI, what's more important?
Okay, engineering versus creativity in the age of AI. Yes.
It's a combination, and it's going on with high speed.
I mean,
Within the industry, then.
Is that something you're trying to market? Sweden has a long reputation for engineering. Is now Sweden trying to get ahead as an AI leader?
When we go out to marketing the Gothenburg and the Gothenburg region, it's all about innovation. And that is part of AI and digitalization and green transition. So of course, but it's a combination.
Anyone have a strong opinion?
My oldest son lives in San Francisco and works down in Foster City for a self-driving car company. And I'd say both go hand in hand. You know, if you go back in history 500 years, Michelangelo wasn't just an artist, he was an engineer. And I think that's the secret. You have to bring those things together. And I know my son, the cars they're producing are wonderfully creative, well engineered. And with AI, hopefully, that's going to join them together even more. So I think it's going to be both. It's got to be both.
I think it's a false binary. I think it's more about human beings, humanity versus
and the human
machines.
We've got to be able to work with.
I think that's a part. That's a question which is probably another panel. You know, if you want to really go deeper into that. But I think that we are seeing this kind of real transitional moment happening here right now, and obviously humans and creativity will be something that's coming, you know, a bit later in the AI game, and so it's more like creativity driving AI transformation in engineering. But then obviously we have to be honest that it's going to be something that transforms probably also creativity in the long run.
Yeah, but I guess being a tech-savvy digital place already, that's probably one of the things we could be branding as a place where these discussions are taking place. We're not falling too far behind. We do have to wrap things up, so please put your hands together for our fantastic panellists. They work very hard up here. And thanks to all of you watching online. Thanks for your patience. If any of you joined late, the whole video will be available on the Up There Everywhere website, I think, from next week. So if you would also like to watch it back again or share it with other friends and colleagues, feel free to do so. There's a short mingle now. So if you do want to talk more politically or pick these lovely panellists' brains, you can do so outside over a Swedish fika and some other things. But thanks very much for being here today.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, we've got a weird name.
Most people just call us Up.
Most people call us Up There.
We're up there, everywhere.
The name is weird. Cool, but weird.
Well, we're cloud-based.
Like the clouds, we're everywhere.
No, we're not Swedish.
Ja, vi är svenska.
Swedish, but global.
We started in Stockholm.
Now we're everywhere.
We're up there everywhere.
The global cloud-based agency.